Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. You know that because you're on my channel. And this is Tim Pierce.
Hey everybody.
Who's been on my channel a million times. Tim.
Hey.
Welcome to your studio.
Welcome to my home. Glad to have you here.
I'm in Los Angeles here. I'm out here. And my first thing that I always do when I come here is to come to Tim's house and we make a video together. I want to ask you about your Bob Dylan session that you did. It's been probably 2 years now, right?
Yeah, it was so glorious. In the middle of the pandemic, this amazing thing happened. Don was called and said, hey, you want to go over to Bob Dylan's and run some songs? And my heart started beating really, really fast. And I went, yeah, even though I was scared a little bit because, you know, he's an intense guy. And so we worked up 12 songs. We went down and ran them. He loved it. We all sat in a circle, tight, just like this. I was this close to him.
I asked Tim about this stuff every day. I would call Tim and we'd talk. And I said, my thing was, did you make any mistakes? And of course, no one makes mistakes because it's all pro session players.
That's true.
But it's a lot of pressure though, because Bob's changing chords wherever, right? He'd change if it was 6 bars, maybe he'd play 4 bars, maybe he'd play 8 bars, right?
It's always a moving target. He's changing everything all the time. The original records, he just laughs
Wait a
at
minute,
them.
didn't you say that he would that you'd be listening to the song trying to work them out and then he starts playing them at the same time?
Oh, it's even hairier than that. So the first 12 songs, we did those like we blasted them down on our first, time together on our first. It wasn't really a rehearsal. We were getting ready to record live off the floor for a live stream, right? That's what this was all about. So we did 12 songs. It was great. It was glorious. And then we came back to do 6 more. He wiped away the 6 that he had chosen. So we were prepped,
Right.
And he said, I want to do these. And you're learning the song while he's playing it. You have Spotify in one earplug on your phone, and you're learning it off the record, and he's already playing it, and you're catching up with him. I mean, it's amazing. And then once you do the song, there are different tempos, different keys, different arrangements. So you're constantly.
How focused were you on this?
It's 100% focused,
and everybody's like that.
Everybody's
right?
like that. So me, Don Was, and Greg Leese, and my thing was very unique. Don Was always hired me at a certain point to be a timekeeper on acoustic guitar. So my role on a bunch of records I did for Don was just to go and be the timekeeper with the drummer because somehow he liked my pocket. And so when he got this thing with Bob Dylan, he automatically thought of me to be actually Bob Dylan from the 60s because we weren't doing new songs. We were redoing his greatest songs for this live stream. So he wanted me to be the early Bob Dylan strummer so Bob wouldn't have to do that. So my role was acoustic, and then Greg Leese was playing mandolin, pedal steel, electric guitar, everything under the sun, slide, everything. But, yeah, there are no mistakes, and there's no patience either.
On whose part? On Bob's part.
On Bob's part. So
right.
you've got like one shot. And, he would throw away everything we prepared and try new stuff all the time, and you're literally learning it off of Spotify, and he's already playing it, and you catch up and you do the song. Maybe you do it one more time and then you move on. They brought in a team from the Village Recorder, a Pro Tools system, and T-Bone Burnett's like main guy to record us, and we recorded everything off the floor. We did like 30 songs, and they eventually did the live stream with actors.
So Tim, okay, so I want to get back to the studio thing. This is why I love Tim so much, is because he's such a phenomenal player. I always revered session players like Tim, and because me being a producer, I wouldn't have the luxury of hiring session players because when I started producing, there were no budgets anymore, really. I mean, by the time 2005 hit, there were no budgets for people like me that were making records with rock bands. You couldn't really hire session guys, so I would have to be the session guy to play stuff.
Well, because you could play everything, you wouldn't bring people in. I'm sure there were some local people you could have brought in, but you actually could play all those parts.
Yeah, but I didn't like to do it.
Right.
It was.
You had to. Necessity for the budgets and everything.
Correct.
I understand.
Correct,
Yeah,
and
I
they
understand.
would expect. The thing is that the record labels didn't care who played it; they just expected it to be right.
That's right.
And unfortunately, a lot of the guys at that time, or girls, whatever, it was guys actually, couldn't play their own songs properly, and so you had to replay their parts.
That's
not all the time, but you did.
That was the period. We're talking about the 90s, right?
The late 90s and the early 2000s.
There was a period, and Howard Benson used to talk about this, where the bands they would sign couldn't play. They had maybe some songs, they had a look, and they would just sign these bands one after the other, but they couldn't necessarily
couldn't play. Almost everyone would have their drummer replaced, right? So they have a session drummer.
Yeah.
And the session drummer's name would not appear. It would appear as a thank you usually.
Yeah, or additional production.
But that's how you knew that someone else other than the drummer from the band played on the record. Is that you would see this other person, Josh Freese, thanked, or whoever it might be, Kenny Aronoff, they would be on there. It's like, oh, they obviously play drums. Or if they're both their
drums, names. I got a lot of additional guitars credits.
Right.
Yeah.
Additional meaning all but one.
But it's way off to the side, like under where.
No, this is an interesting thing too, Tim, because I would never credited myself as playing in any records, and not realizing that people got paid by being a player on this. I didn't know this.
Yeah, you're right. And there were royalties, every country in the
sound
world.
Exchanges and things like that?
Yeah, and PPL, every country in the world except for the United States, North Korea, and I think it's Iraq, pays royalties on performances. So radio airplay all over the world pays the musicians who play on the records. And you're right, you missed out on that by not filing union sessions and putting your name on it. Because all you really need to get those royalties is to show that you actually played on the record.
So my thing about that was that I never wanted to take credit away from the band because I was the producer, so I figured it's my name on the record. So I don't need to I don't want people to think it's someone else doing it other than the band.
Well, I did the same thing with Shinedown when I did all the guitars on 2 of their records. I waited a decade before I started telling people.
Yeah.
Out of respect and courtesy and real love for these guys in the band. Mm-hmm. And that's just, you respected them, you wanted them to have their own identity, and so you did that. It was the right thing.
Yeah.
Good on you.
So, this thing though about precision, Tim, this is the thing that I love about your playing so much is your precision and heart. You have great feel, you have great pocket, soul, everything, and yet you don't make mistakes either. You don't have rushed things. You don't hit bum notes. You play in every video, every one of your videos, and you'll play long passages. You'll play really complex. You'll play simple things, complex things. There's never a note that's bent sharp. There's never a run that has a wrong note in it. There's never anything that is, no matter what you play, you execute it perfectly.
Well, my schooling was L.A. in 1980 when I moved here. L.A. was Mecca. It was this giant campus of amazing musicians. So I got to hear right away when I got here and started doing stuff, guys like Lukather and Dan Huff and Paul Jackson and Michael Landau. These guys were doing all the records, and you would hear the sessions, and they were first-take players.
Yeah.
And so you realized, oh, this is a whole different level than I thought. Because what happens when you, grow up in the Midwest or whatever? I grew up in New Mexico. You listen to a record and you go, oh, I could do that part. Whatever, on Rosanna, I could do that part, sure. But you don't realize it's any part they want at any time, and it's delivered instantly.
That they're improvising.
Truly, like Luke walks into a Don Henley session, and he throws that stuff down immediately and then leaves. And it's the greatest thing you've ever heard, and you don't realize it's just like that. And it's all across town, these guys were showing up doing this stuff instantly. And I was it wiped me out. I was like a deer in the headlights.
So the pressure to do that, so immediately you realize, oh, you can't make any mistakes, and you got to come up with your best stuff on the first take or the second take.
And worse than that, when they ask you to do something that's the opposite of what you just did, you go, oh yeah, I can do this, and they go, we'd like the opposite of that. Give us that now. It was clean, we want it dirty. It was syncopated, we want it straight. It was swung, we want it not swung. You know what I'm saying? So it's thinking on your feet and just pivoting instantly.
And you can't be dejected about it, right, Tim? You have to be.
You are dejected, but you hide it, and I said this before. Your ego gets obliterated, and you bring your ego back full force immediately, constantly.
I love
like you
that.
get slapped in the face and you come back like, well, I'm the greatest thing. You know, you have to bring it back full force every time you get cut to pieces. And that's the job.
So, were there times, I know that the answer to this, but I'll just ask it anyways, times when you played a part that's way better, that they've asked you to play something else that's completely different, you knew the part that you did was far better, though, right?
That's true. It happens so many times, though, that you get used to it and you really give up the expectation that your great part is... And then what would happen is, in the session, the mix is glorious. The guitars are loud. You do one guitar and another guitar and another guitar, and it's just filling the room, right? And then you hear the record, and they're like, "Where are they?" And an electric guitar, there's a threshold. If it gets below a certain threshold, it loses all of its size.
What's the point of having it?
Exactly.
In there, right?
So that I gave up all my expectations. I felt like whatever I got that day in the room was the peak of the experience. And then whatever I heard on the record later, you know, if I was lucky, you got to hear a part, you know.
Tim, you can have really, really simple parts that can make a song, though. If I play this, Tim, that's just one chord, 4 notes, but that conjures up so much, doesn't it?
I felt in the studio, because I had no music school, no training, that my actual shot, what was going to keep me in the game, was executing the best version of the simplest part or the simplest version of the best part. And luckily, when Kurt Cobain and Nirvana showed up, music got simple. So I was here in the 80s just getting my ass handed to me by guys like Lukather and Dan Huff and like that, because they were so great at what they did. I was learning the whole time. By 1990, I had sort of a game going. I could sort of do this rhythm and the sounds and everything. 1993, was it when Nirvana showed up?
91.
91, okay.
End of 91.
End of 91.
When they became huge, November.
The world opened for me because they wanted a studio player who could sound like the band guy, and I was that guy. I had no schooling, no training, but I could show up and deliver parts, simple parts, that felt like I had written them, I owned them, like my life depended on them. So if you play a part and it's simple, and you go and you're condescending about it, or you're not really committing to it, or you're not authoritative about it, they know that. Yeah. But when I played a simple part, it was the best. You know, it was like my life depended on it.
Right, you owned the part.
Exactly.
You owned it.
That's actually what kept me working all the time. 1990, I started working constantly, and when Nirvana showed up, and what I did became what people needed. It was just I was working 7 days a week. I mean, I would work with clients, you know, during the week, and then people would wait for me on the weekend, and I'd fill them in on the weekend, and that went for like 20 years. So it was the best version of the simplest part, and you just have to remember everything in short bursts. Read the room, find out what people wanted, find out what their favorite band was, maybe what their favorite band wasn't. Try and chase those sounds, those parts. And basically, if it's a new person, then you want to win them over in the first 15 minutes. The key is to give them something in the first 15 minutes that makes them go, yeah, he can make our dreams come true with the guitar. So for me, it was orchestrating guitar parts. And that's never shredding, and it's never complex. It's basically simple things that all fit together in different frequencies. And so by the time, you know, I kind of finished my busiest part of my session career, I had no chops.
Which is why I love Tim's channel so much, is because he actually gets to play the guitar now.
Totally.
So you have a whole new life as a guitar player who gets to play solos, and you get to play whatever you want as an artist.
These days, I play more guitar than I did then in some ways, because I'm actually working up lead parts and solos and performances. So it's really been a nice chapter. We're
actually both in that same thing, even though I don't play very often on my YouTube channel, but I play on Instagram.
On Instagram, yeah. Yeah,
and I warm up every day, and I film my little quick lessons, or every other day or so, and that's the most playing that I've done in 25 years or more, 30, I don't know, at least 20 years.
Yeah, I think we're like teenagers now. I worked so hard as a session musician that I would come home and just try and recover from it, and I wouldn't necessarily practice because I was under the gun trying to come up with stuff, and let alone the acoustic guitar parts you had to come up with. You would do electrics, and they go, okay, now we're doing acoustics, and you have to come up with all this stuff bent over like that, and get different sections, and orchestrate acoustics, and high strungs, and 12 strings. And so by the end of the day, I'd be driving home like, oh, I'm not going to practice because I got to get up tomorrow morning and do it again. I would just try to eat well, exercise a little bit, keep my marriage good, and do the job. So now I'm like a teenager again, and I'm actually practicing guitar. I take lessons from people online. It's really fun.
So Tim, the thing about being a YouTuber though, right? I released a video earlier today on West Montgomery, and people on my channel don't really care about jazz, unfortunately. They just, I don't know why. When I started my channel, I had my content was mainly jazz. I talked about music theory, ear training, and things like that, but film scoring. But I did a lot of jazz videos, and now jazz just doesn't work anymore. And the further that we get away from that, if I think back to people like Larry Carlton or Lukather, guys in the 70s that were doing session, and earlier, the Wrecking Crew, they were all jazz musicians.
They were.
Historically, session players were jazz musicians.
They all had jazz backgrounds.
Bad jazz backgrounds.
That meant they could improvise, come up with stuff on the fly.
Yeah.
And the ones that had good pocket ended up in all the studios in LA.
That's right.
They had great pocket. It's like Louis Shelton. These guys, then they would end up in the rooms with Frank Sinatra and the Beach Boys and all these people.
It's because they could improvise, so they could come up with parts. So improvising is part of being a jazz musician is improvising, or being a rock musician or blues musician. Back then, in the 70s, when we grew up, everybody improvised. Yeah. That was just part of the gig. That's what you wanted to do. You wanted to take solos and play different stuff every time. And that would extend to playing rhythm guitar parts and coming up with these things that make you a session player.
Well, and with regards to the Wrecking Crew, they talk about this in the film at a certain point, almost on a particular day. The same with, Kurt Cobain changed everybody's life in one day in LA with bringing this new style. Well, the Wrecking Crew, apparently, rock bands became kind of what they wanted to hear in studios at a certain point, and the Wrecking Crew kind of all at once was done. And then it was like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and bands were being recorded in studios.
In the same way that Nirvana changed it.
Exactly. So then the session musician became became a rock animal. And that's the only reason I started to work. I moved here in 1980, and by then it was already well established. Lukather was a rock animal, and he was doing all the sessions. Landau was a rock animal and doing all the sessions.
Okay,
each other.
Let's talk about I just did a video on Wichita Lineman, which I didn't know was one of your favorites. It's one of my all-time favorite songs.
It is my favorite. I have no problem saying this. It's my favorite record of all time.
It's absolutely beautiful. The string arrangement, the melody, the chord progression, everything about that. Glen Campbell's vocal is astoundingly good. And everything about the track, every part is so perfectly played. They probably played it down one time to, whatever.
You're right, one or two times. Now, my love of music comes from Top 40 radio in the 60s, and that song came out in 1968.
Yep.
And it's evocative. And it's not about the guitar. The guitar is a flavor and a seasoning. There's a gut string in there that's amazing if you really focus on it.
Yeah.
And then Glen plays the solo.
Yep.
I learned this. He borrowed Carol Kay's Dan Electro 6-string bass. You'll see Glen in TV shows playing the Fender Bass 6 when he plays that solo.
Yep.
And he does it live. It's like one of those minus vocal tracks he's playing against. He's singing live and playing that solo live, and it's phenomenal. Gives you another window into how good these people were. But so he borrowed Carol Kay's bass, Dan Electro bass for this. But I know what really, really brings it home for me is the orchestra.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
And then that vocal, I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time.
Well, Jimmy Webb, one of the best lyricists and melody writers.
Yeah. And the kind of, you probably explained, I didn't look at your video, but the chord changes are so inventive and so beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. When I say a record, it's my favorite record of all time. My favorite song.
He means, let's talk about that. When people talk about records, now when people talked about records, session players, to me, when I first started out, I thought they meant album. When they say record, they mean song or recording.
And it's the realization of the song.
Yeah.
It's not the writing of the song. It's not the melody. It's not the lyrics. It's the record. It's listening to Red Rain and hearing that build at the beginning. It's listening to All Along the Watchtower and hearing his voice and the acoustic guitar. Records, it's the actual production, because rarely does your dream come true when you sit and write something. I mean, you don't get Stairway to Heaven. When you get Stairway to Heaven, it's one of your favorite records of all time. Wichita Lineman, Red Rain, All Along the Watchtower. These are records.
Yes.
It's the culmination, the realization in the studio of an idea.
What's another song like Wichita Lineman that there's very few songs like Wichita Lineman. It has such a deep lyric and such an unusual melody. But what's another song from that era that is a song that you love?
Well, to me, it was bands like the Fifth Dimension. It was Burt Bacharach and Hal David, all their songs.
Yeah.
And there's maybe a half a dozen of them that we could pick. I mean, it's The Look of Love, it's California Soul, it's Aquarius by the Fifth Dimension.
I love
so,
Aquarius.
This is where we go with this stuff. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great songs.
And those songwriters, they were coming out of the tradition of the songwriters from the 30s and 40s, really.
Well, and it's also the Beatles, too. They were all actually grabbing from every genre. And so, the songs had interesting chord changes, borrowed chords, and dissonance, and tension, and risk, key changes.
Yes.
So there's not a lot of that going on right now.
Not many key changes today. I made a video about that recently. For 25% of songs from 1965 to 2009 had a key change in it. 25%, a quarter. And then since 2009, no songs. There was one rap song that had a key change, but it was just a different sample that was in a different key that they changed to.
Well, I feel really lucky that I was born in '58 and I grew up listening to an amazing era of music, the '60s and the '70s, and I'm not shy about saying I think it's the greatest. I mean, Stevie Wonder. It's
right.
Like his songs, My Sharia Moore.
Oh my God! That's a song that I would have named of that era. That is a perfect song.
Yeah. So I feel very lucky to be this age and have that be my DNA, what raised me in music. And then being able to move here in 1980 and really be humbled by the realization that I was barely good enough to exist compared to these other guys. And I spent a decade going to school in LA, doing records, touring. I did well, but I spent a decade going to school so that I could, around 1990,
so that Kurt Cobain could change your life.
It was just kind of perfect.
You need to make that video how Kurt Cobain changed my life.
You're right. You're right. I should.
I mean,
I should.
That's you. Yeah. And it's interesting that you credit him. I think that everybody knows I'm a massive Nirvana fan.
Yeah.
And Kurt Cobain was a great orchestrator for the rhythm parts that he wrote behind his vocals were incredibly great. The riffs, Come As You Are, All Apologies, Heart-Shaped Box, these parts that were just really unique, worked perfectly with the vocals, but were actual orchestrated guitar parts.
Well, and there were two things happened that opened all the doors for me. One was I played on Crowded House's Don't Dream It's Over. And
one of the best songs ever.
That's another one, right.
That's another one, a perfect song. For
songwriters, it was like, get this guy. Even though I was a small part of that, Neil Finn played the original part, but I did all the color parts on it. Songwriters gravitated towards me because they found out I played on it. But the other thing that happened was, when Nirvana showed up, it was get the studio guy that sounds like the band guy. And I was that guy. And there were a few others, too. Rusty Anderson was another one people went to. He was brilliant at that until he got scooped up by McCartney. But I was the studio guy that could sound like a band guy. And I was also really willing to say yes to everybody. That's the other thing. In the studio, you get your feelings hurt a lot. You get, torn to pieces when and you have to come right back.
Tim says this always with a smile, though.
Well, it's the job, but I was always the guy who could take it and come back with a smile and stay an hour later and do my best to try and give people what they wanted. Not every musician can do that. I don't know that I could do that today. It's just at a certain point, I never faulted anybody for going no, but I always said yes.
Tim, why, you've known me a long time now, why could I never do a recording as a producer anymore. What do I just not have the patience for that, or is it that I just never worked with the right people?
No, I think you earn that at a certain point, but it's to your point earlier in this video. You are an artist in what you do on YouTube and Instagram. You do your own thing. Once you get a taste of doing your own thing,
You can't go back.
you can't go back.
Right.
And it's that more than anything. You know, it's you're an artist now.
Okay, so what are the advantages of us being in our 60s? We're not ashamed of being in our 60s. That's a fact of life.
Not at all.
But being on social media, although I don't consider YouTube social media, YouTube's not really social media, but being on this platform in your 60s, what do we have an advantage over people that are not in their 60s?
I think in some ways because we don't expect as much.
Okay.
Because we've been through a career, we've run the gauntlet in one career already. So when you do a second career, I mean, I used to study psychology, and Carl Jung always wanted to hire people who had already come from another career to go to school and be therapists. And that caught my ear at one point. So because it's our second chapter and our second career.
It's my fourth career, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then more power to you. You're not as attached to it. I mean, you know what it is, you do it, but you've kind of seen it all before. And the other thing is, it's like you don't worry as much about stuff.
So I did a record back in 2003. I'm not going to say what it is, and I've never played this record on my channel. I've never talked about a record. I worked with a solo artist, and that a friend of mine connected me with, and I did his record, and it was just me and him and a drummer. And I pretty much played everything. He played the acoustic guitar parts, but I did all the overdubs. And I had some little keyboard parts, string parts and stuff like that. And I mixed the record. And he got a record deal. And his A&R guy was, I'm sorry to say, kind of a knucklehead. And the artist, because he'd been trying to get a record deal for years and years, when they said, why don't you take these parts and some of these string parts, and we'll get a string arranger to do it. And I was thinking, why don't we just put out the record like it is, because the record sounds great. So not only did we add these orchestral parts that an LA orchestrator that I won't name, he did honestly a terrible job orchestrating this thing, and they didn't blend with the tracks that were recorded, and then they hired somebody to mix the record who ruined the record. And I was so mad about this, and one of my best friends, my buddy Jake, said to me at the time, Jake is he's still an A&R guy. Jake works for RCA Records, and Jake said to me, don't burn a relationship over a record. Meaning, don't get attached to this thing.
Oh, gosh.
There's nothing that you can do about this. This guy's going to make a knucklehead decision. And he knew the version that I turned in that got this kid the record deal. And then he heard the record that was finished, and it was awful. Because it had terrible mixes and had all these extra orchestral parts that ruined the songs. I mean, I crafted this thing and mixed as I went, and it was a really powerful record, and I don't talk about it anymore because the record that's out there is this crappy record.
Okay, so back to a couple of things we've said. So when I said the only expectation I had was on the day I did the session. After that, I had to give up all expectations because it was never allowed in the mix. I don't know if they'd even use the parts. Some parts got erased.
Yeah.
The other thing is, now that you actually call the shots, you're not in a system where other people have to take ownership and push you down.
That's right.
So all of these people had to take ownership and take it away from you in order to justify
when you
their
talk about
jobs.
all these people, A&R people, the A&R
even
person,
the mixer, the A&R person,
the mixer, and all their decisions had to be affirmed.
Yeah.
I picked this mixing engineer for this. I got this orchestrator to do this thing. I made the record. Oh, yeah, forget about the producer. He doesn't count.
And that's the entertainment business. Like, I listen to a podcast called Armchair Expert right now, and it's Dax Shepard. And he was an actor that worked in the system his whole life. And the podcast is so successful, he would laugh if NBC or even He's on Spotify. So, but he would laugh, and you and I have talked about this. If an entertainment company gives you an offer,
No.
no.
No, the autonomy that I have on YouTube to make whatever I want. This video that we're making can be any length that we decide.
Yeah.
We'll talk until we're done.
Yeah.
And there is no format that we follow.
No, once you make a living as an artist, you can decide tomorrow morning to release a video or not. You can decide to do the opposite. The thing I love most about being a YouTuber right now, I can wake up tomorrow morning and decide to do the opposite of what I planned.
Right.
The exact opposite.
I'll talk with Tim about making a video and come up with ideas, and then when I go to make the video, it'll be something completely different.
Exactly.
Right? And
you can't do that with a hierarchy and a corporation and a company.
Because you have to do what you have to brainstorm it, make all these plans, and then that's what you do. You can never change on a dime what you're going to do and say, you know what, I'm not inspired by that. I'm going to do something completely different.
Well, and partnerships are always restrictive. As much as I like you, if you and I were partners, we'd last like 3 days.
Right. That's not true, actually, Tim. That's not true.
Okay.
But the thing about don't burn a relationship, but really what Jake was saying is that you're not the artist, you're the producer, and if the artist wants to screw it up, that you just have to let them screw it up.
Well, and the artist is always getting whispered in the ear by people who have an agenda. So more than the artist manager, we didn't even mention that. The artist manager might be going, you need to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And forget those
And of
guys.
course, what happened to this guy? Put out his record, it flopped, and he got dropped.
Usually what happens.
Yeah. And all the people that were interested in him, when they heard the record, they all said to me, what happened to the record? Why does it sound terrible? I said, hey, I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's just great to be out of the entertainment industry. It was great to work in it. It was wonderful to be part of it. And now at this point, I think that's what's great about being in your 60s and having your own, kind of media thing. It's you know what it was like to be part of the system, and you don't have to cater to it anymore. It's wonderful.
So, Tim, we're in a new year now. Anything that you're going to do different this year? Any new things? Is there any overarching thing that you're going to do with your channel this year?
I'm going to try and bring more joy to every video. I'm going to try and play better guitar in every video. I'm going to try and get better sounds, right?
Of course. That means get new gear.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it coming, and I'm going to try not to burn any bridges. In the new realm with the new people, and I'm going to try and stay healthy. I feel 27. It's amazing. I'm trying to keep my hearing, and play better guitar. Basically, I'm trying to play better guitar, and keep making videos that get views, but also make videos that people like. I mean, what I've really learned this year, the thing is, when you mature on YouTube, it's no longer about necessarily constant growth, although you're the exception to that. But for me, it's about having like the best restaurant, maybe not having 60 restaurants, but having the best restaurant that the people that come to me, my people, my masterclass members, I want to give them the best experience possible, even if it's a smaller business than some businesses. So
okay, so I'm going to give this do a shout out here for people to subscribe to our channels. When you hear us do this in our videos, we don't really spend that much time on it. And some people say, oh, why do you even have to say that? Well, subscribing to the channels, to some people that for my channel to get to interview people in the old school media, when you try and interview these people that are older, that are well known, that have established PR people, they just look at the numbers, and that's it. That's the only thing that they understand. Basically, your subscribers are your circulation, like the circulation of a magazine. So please subscribe to both of our channels. And
subscribe, because the homepage, a lot of people look at the homepage and think, oh, that's YouTube. Why haven't I seen a video by Tim? And it's because maybe some stuff has crowded it out. But if you subscribe,
then it'll be in there.
It'll be in there.
Because a lot of times people don't realize that they're not subscribed because our videos end up on their homepage all the time.
Exactly.
So, anyways,